If it's Wednesday, stocks struggle as the Federal Reserve slashes interest rates again, looking to boost a cooling labor market as the country braces for sweeping changes to the U.S. economy in Trump's second term. Plus, President-elect Trump warns former Congresswoman Liz Cheney that she, quote, could be in a lot of trouble after House Republicans release a new report calling for her to be investigated by the FBI. And House Speaker Mike Johnson faces backlash from inside his conference and from Elon Musk as Congress moves to jam through a massive short-term funding bill with the deadline looming. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in Washington as the future of the U.S. economy takes center stage, with markets taking a sharp turn into negative territory, ending the trading day just moments ago, closing down more than 1,000 points after the Federal Reserve this afternoon announced its third and final interest rate cut for the year. It comes as there is enormous economic uncertainty ahead. President-elect Trump vowing to make sweeping changes to the American workforce, the tax code, the government, and the country's relationship with our largest trading partners. This afternoon, Fed Chair Jerome Powell pointing to progress on inflation and a cooling labor market as the driver behind today's rate cut, while also noting the underlying economy's strength. He also stated bluntly that the economic outlook is uncertain, while suggesting the Federal Reserve was studying the potential impacts of Trump's tariff agenda, which remains a major wild card for policymakers.
We just don't know really very much at all about the actual policies, so it's very premature to try to make any kind of conclusion. We don't know what will be tariffed from what countries, for how long, in what size. We don't know whether there'll be retaliatory tariffs. We don't know what the transmission of any of that will be into consumer prices. We're at the stage of doing what other forecasters are doing, which is kind of thinking about these questions, but not trying to get to definitive answers for some time.
Those tariffs, just one piece of a Trump agenda that could dramatically remake the U.S. economy. During the campaign, Trump pledged to impose blanket tariffs on goods imported into the U.S. And during the transition, he's threatened some of the highest tariffs on our three biggest trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and China. Trump also pledging to deport millions of undocumented immigrants who currently make up roughly 5% of the entire U.S. workforce, according to estimates, and even higher percentages of key industries like construction, agriculture, and hospitality. In addition, the president-elect is calling for potentially massive cuts to government spending, as much as $2 trillion. He's also calling for cuts to taxes and regulations he sees as burdensome to business. How much of this he will actually be able to implement is unclear, but economists warn that Trump's pledges on immigration and tariffs specifically could raise costs for Americans, even as voters sent a clear message that they elected him to lower prices. In his interview with NBC's Kristen Welker, the president-elect tried to dismiss the idea that Americans would bear the brunt of his tariff policy.
I want to delve into one of your signature promises on the campaign trail, which was to end inflation, to lower prices. You are now proposing tariffs against the United States' three biggest trading partners. Economists of all stripes say that ultimately consumers pay the price of tariffs.
I don't believe it.
Can you guarantee American families won't pay more?
I can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee tomorrow.
And joining me now for more on the Fed decision and the potential economic impact of the president-elect's policies is NBC's Brian Chung, and Garrett Haake has the latest on the potential political implications of Trump's agenda. Thank you so much for joining us. Brian, I want to start with you. We just heard from the Fed chairman, and markets don't seem to like what they heard.
Yeah, no, not at all, Gabe. It's been a pretty rough day as of the market close for the Dow and the S&P 500. And look, I think the big story here is that the Federal Reserve essentially didn't deliver what markets were hoping for, which is expectations of more aggressive rate cutting into 2025. So the decision today from the Federal Reserve is that they're cutting interest rates by 0.25 percentage point. As a reminder, that is the third interest rate cut of 2024. And this is after an aggressive rate hike campaign from the Fed in the years after the pandemic. Why? To quell high inflation, which peaked at around 9% in a yearly rate as of the summer of 2022. The good news is that inflation has indeed come down, but the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell still says that the job is not done on getting inflation to their target of 2%. So for that reason, the Fed is now saying, you know what, we're going to continue to likely cut interest rates into 2025, but maybe not at as fast a pace as people had been anticipating. They're projecting just 2 interest rate cuts over the course of 2025. Again, we got 3 this year. Markets tend to like interest rate cuts, specifically big tech stocks, which are heavily weighted. That's a big reason why you probably can read into the Dow and the S&P 500 as a negative reaction to the Fed announcement today.
You know, Brian, we're still about a month away from inauguration. So how else is the market and businesses how they're preparing for this incoming administration?
Well, I think the teetering that we've seen in markets over the past few months, basically since the election, has been kind of part of that story. Because on one hand, you had the off to the races reaction in the weeks after the election, where you had markets and big business saying, hey, this Trump administration that's going to come into office in January is going to be good for regulation. They're going to cut regulation. They're going to cut taxes. That's good for the business environment. And then, again, you saw the kind of markets go up to the moon. On the other side of the coin, you do have the story on tariffs. And a lot of big businesses and CEOs have a lot of indigestion about this, because the concern is that if the Trump administration wages a war on the United States' biggest trade partners, that could, over the short term, hobble American businesses, raise costs, introduce a lot of uncertainty that these big businesses don't like. So that might explain the slide that we've seen in broad equities markets over the last few trading sessions. And that story is going to remain untold going into January 20th, because, again, the president has been very close to the chest in terms of when he would implement the tariffs. I asked him if he would do it on day one. He didn't. He basically said, you're going to find out. So because of all of that, the story here is very much uncertain. And even Fed Chair Powell was asked the question about what would be the impact of this thing on the economy. And he said, look, we just don't know what that's going to look like, so I'm not going to comment on it.
Brian Chung, thank you so much for joining us and breaking it all down. I want to turn now to Garrett Haake, who covers the Trump transition. And Garrett, look, how much of a chance is it that these proposals are actually going to be implemented? Or is this a case of having to take Trump seriously but not literally?
Well, I think there are a couple of different categories here. I think on things like mass deportations and on changing the regulatory environment around energy, Trump will go as far as Congress will take him. This is something where he and congressional Republicans are pretty much in lockstep. He ran on these proposals. So did congressional Republicans. They want to get this done. On cutting spending, I go the other way. I think cutting spending is a very easy thing to talk about, but a very difficult thing to actually do. Every dollar that you see as waste, somebody in their district sees as a proposal that they need. With the majorities as narrow as they are, I think he's going to have a very difficult time doing that. The X factor on all this is the tariff part of this, because I think the tariffs are kind of his Swiss Army knife tool. I think that's why he didn't give Brian a straight answer on the floor of the exchange, and why he hasn't given any of us a straight answer for a very long time. He likes that he's able to use them as a threat, as a weapon, as kind of the thing that's always in his back pocket and available to him to try to enact other political goals, regardless of the specifics of the tariff policy.
Yeah, he always likes to talk about negotiating tactics to
That's
strike a deal. So, look, the economy and specifically high prices, they were such a huge part of his campaign. What did he make of his answer to Kristen, basically not guaranteeing the prices are going to come down?
I would have paid any amount of money to hear what Joe Biden's reaction was to that, because this is sort of exactly what the Biden administration had been talking about for years. Once they got pivoted off the idea that inflation was transitory, then it became, it's very hard to get prices to go down. As you know, it's one thing to get inflation to stop going up, which the Biden folks feel like they did a pretty good job of cooling the rise, but bringing the prices back down is a whole other story. Trump is starting to grapple with that, and I think using this transition period as an opportunity to reset expectations about exactly how quickly, if at all, that can be done.
You mentioned this a little bit in your first answer, but he needs Congress to help him with this a lot. With the slim majority in the House, how do you think that'll affect it? And do you think, Congress might not be as receptive as they have been in the past?
Yeah, I think the Trump team has been overly bullish about what they're going to be able to get done through Congress, from my, seat covering Congress and covering the transition. Just watch what's happening right now, trying to keep the government funded until March. It doesn't take a very large group of people to create enormous problems. And except on the very few issues where Trump and congressional Republicans are in total alignment, he can be banging his head against a wall to pass very basic stuff on a pretty regular basis with majorities this small.
Garrett Haake covering the Trump transition. Garrett, thank you.
You bet.
Turning now to another busy day on Capitol Hill, where the House could vote as early as tonight on a continuing resolution to keep the government open until March. Congressional leaders finally released a 1,500-page bill late yesterday after several delays, but the bill enraging some of House Speaker Mike Johnson's conservative allies, with one yesterday calling the process a total dumpster fire and another today calling it a expletive sandwich. Trump ally Elon Musk now also potentially complicating matters, encouraging Republicans to vote against the bill and going so far as to claim moments ago that the bill is dead. It comes as we got some other surprising news from the Hill today that the House Ethics Committee will release its report on former Congressman and former Trump Attorney General pick, Matt Gaetz. That report on allegations tied to Gaetz's alleged drug use and sexual misconduct could be made public this week. And in other major news from the Hill, President-elect Trump is taking notice of a report released by Georgia Congressman and chair of a GOP-led subcommittee, Barry Loudermilk, recommending the FBI investigate former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney over her involvement in the January 6th committee. The report says, quote, evidence uncovered by the subcommittee revealed that former Congresswoman Cheney tampered with at least one witness, Cassidy Hutchinson, by secretly communicating with Hutchinson without Hutchinson's attorney's knowledge. In a statement, Cheney slammed the report as a malicious and cowardly assault on the truth. I want to turn now to NBC's Ali Vitale, who covers Capitol Hill. She joins me now. And Ali, what's the feeling right now? Is this CR going to pass?
I think the overall feeling can best be summed up by yikes. This is a moment where we are seeing not just the regular actors on the Republican side of the aisle, Johnson's regular detractors who would never vote for a continuing resolution anyway, but they're being much more vocal about the kind of bill that Johnson put forward and put forward at the 11th hour. The balancing act here was always that Johnson was going to have to keep the government open, but also probably do it with Democratic votes, given the fact that any 30 Republican members don't typically vote for CRs, and so they were probably not going to vote for this one anyway. But now we're seeing that there's much more pushback to this beyond just the regular folks. People on the Senate side are upset both about things that didn't make it into the bill, but then also about how large this bill has ultimately gotten. This idea of it being a Christmas tree with way more ornaments on it than most senators and most House members wanted is a huge problem. And so Johnson's got a problem in front of him when it comes to funding the government. Does this thing fall apart? They are really at the 11th hour here. But then also, what does this portend for his battle to keep the Speaker's gavel? This is something that vexed his predecessor, Kevin McCarthy, who ultimately was ousted because he worked with Democrats to keep the government open. That was over a debt ceiling battle. This is going to be over just a continuing resolution. But nevertheless, people are really mad at the Speaker right now, and we're not exactly sure what the Speaker's going to do, and then also what it means for him remaining Speaker.
You know, and the Speaker could also have a problem on his hands several months from now. So how much concern is there that there will be another funding fight on the Hill during Trump's first 100 days in office?
Exactly. And that's one of the other problems here, too, is that hardline conservatives especially were eager to actually do a funding deadline that goes through March. They felt like that gave them enough time and space to let the president-elect really get into office, make his priorities known, and then craft the appropriations process as he saw fit. But it also means that they were able to fund the government and have the appropriations fight before April, when another series of sequestration or just general cuts across the government kick in because of past deals that were made by McCarthy and other Republicans and Democrats together. So there's a bunch of juggling acts that are happening here in regards to not just keeping the government open now, but keeping it open in March, and then what happens after March. They're doing a lot before the end of the year.
And Ali, because you don't have enough to follow on the Hill, turning now to the Matt Gaetz ethics report.
Yeah.
Do we know why the Ethics Committee voted now to release it?
Yeah, again, they're doing the most at the end of the year here, Gabe. But this is something that we're learning. The Ethics Committee ultimately has decided that they're going to release. That's notable because we don't typically get insight into the Ethics Committee itself. They really do take a vow to not leak what happens in the room. So it's notable that we even know this much and that we've been able to follow this process along as closely as we have. But this could mean a few different things, that the Ethics Committee is ready to set yet another precedent of releasing a report about a former member member who is no longer a member of this body. It also shows that they want to act independently of what other people in leadership have said they preferred. You'll remember potentially that Speaker Mike Johnson said he would prefer that this report not be publicly released. And then you've got Gates over here in the wings basically saying that he could threaten a return to Congress if they're trying to release this report, because he wants to come back and effectively expose the hypocrisy of this process. That would be really hard. He's already resigned his seat, but Gates is an agitator who knows this building well. If they come for him, it seems likely that he would try to come for them too.
And Allie, while we're at it, while we're talking about former members of Congress, House Republicans are calling for Liz Cheney to be investigated over her January 6th committee work. So what is behind that?
That's exactly right. We knew that when Republicans took the gavel 2 years ago, that one of the key investigation points was going to be January 6th and trying to basically undo or create other narratives around what the January 6th Select Committee put forward during their public hearings. Cheney, of course, was the centerpiece of that, not just as the #2 member on that committee, but as the top Republican serving there. Certainly, this is something that President-elect Trump has weighed in on, saying that she's done things that, in his words, could get her in trouble. And all of this leads back to the road of what could President Biden do? Does he need to issue preemptive pardons? This is very much a live ball on your beat, on our beat, and we're watching Republicans in releasing this final report around January 6th and in focusing it on Cheney. We're sort of watching the fruits of that labor come out, and it's an open question of what's going to be done now about that.
Allie Vitale with her hands full on Capitol Hill. Allie, thank you. And coming up, as we wait to see what happens next on the fight to fund the government, I'll speak to members of Congress from both sides of the aisle next. Plus, the White House distances itself from the Ukrainian operation that assassinated a Russian general in Moscow. We'll get a report from the scene of where that attack happened. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. As we mentioned, Congress has until the end of the week to fund the government, and they are scrambling to pass a package that includes cash to keep the lights on, plus a bevy of other agenda items. So let's bring in a couple of House members to talk about what's happening right now. Joining me now is Georgia Republican Congressman Buddy Carter. He recently wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post encouraging bipartisanship, titled, "I sleep in my office. The rest of Congress should too." Congressman, thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. We'll get to your op-ed shortly, but I want to start with the continuing resolution under consideration to avoid a government shutdown at the end of the week. You've said you support the package, but your House Republican colleague, Nicole Malliotakis, posted that Republicans are in the majority, and yet the Democrats seem to get more of their priorities in than we do. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, the Democrats are in a pretty strong position to be negotiating, to be quite honest with you. They seem to stick together a little better than we do at times. But, you know, we've got a lot of good wins in this legislation, and I hope people understand that, particularly when it comes to the health care package, particularly when it comes to PBM reform, the middlemen that the president has spoken about. There's reforms in there that I've been working on for 10 years and that Nicole has herself endorsed and supported. And, you know, you have to look at the package as a whole. Look, I served in the Georgia State Legislature for 10 years, and I know about voting on big omnibus bills like this. Yeah, there are parts of it in there that you don't like. There are parts of it in there that stink, but at the same time, there's a lot of good in there as well, and you just have to judge and decide which way you want to vote.
You know, Congressman, one person that doesn't like the CR is Elon Musk. He's been tasked to cut government spending by the president-elect. Your fellow DOGE committee member, Ralph Norman, posted that any member who claims to support the DOGE should not support what he calls this CR of inefficiency. Don't get weak in the knees before we even get started. So why do you think they're wrong? Are you worried that Musk will launch a primary challenge to those who support it, as he's threatened?
Look, I represent the people of the 1st Congressional District of Georgia. I've been in South Georgia all my life, and I've seen a lot of hurricanes, but I've never seen the destruction that went along with Hurricane Helene. It was devastating. This package contains disaster relief. Our people have to have it. I'm going to vote for this package because of the disaster relief, because of the health care reforms. It's got a lot of good things in it. Yeah, I'd like to have pay-fors for everything, and we need to work on that. Look, I'm on the Budget Committee. I don't think there's anyone more concerned about our national debt than I am. But at the same time, I've got people at home who are hurting, who have to have help, and they have to have it now. Ag is the #1 industry in the state of Georgia. If we don't get these farmers some relief now, they're going to go out of business. And when they go out of business, we got problems.
And if it looks like the CR is in jeopardy, do you want Donald Trump to come out in support of it?
Absolutely. We need him to come out in support of it because it's got so many good things in it. Yeah, there are some things that I wished weren't in it and things that I don't really like. But at the same time, disaster relief, that has to be our focus, and it has to be, it's got to be passed. We got to have it yesterday.
And look, I want to zoom out a bit and look at this through the eyes of an average American. To them, it may seem like Congress hasn't done a whole lot this term and is trying to cram in all this stuff into one bill down to the wire. Is this how Congress should be functioning?
No, it's not how Congress should be functioning. I agree. I would like to take it one step at a time. I'd like to get back to regular order where we pass 12 appropriation bills. I think all of us would like that. But the reality is this is where we're at right now. The reality is that these farmers, that these tree growers, that they are hurting, that if we don't get them some help now, they're not going to make it. And if they don't make it, listen, the American farmer feeds the world. If they don't make it, we got a problem.
And Congressman, I now want to turn to that piece you wrote in the Washington Post on bipartisanship. It's titled, "I sleep in my office, the rest of Congress should too." What do you mean by that? Is Congress really more bipartisan than it may appear from the outside?
Absolutely, it is. Look, I do sleep in my office, and with all due respect to staff members, we make sure that boundaries are respected. But at the same time, I'm up here to work, not to live. And I stay in my office. We have a members gym. We pay dues to that members gym. It's bipartisan. There are probably nearly 40 or 50 members, Republicans and Democrats, who stay in their office. We have gym equipment, we've got lockers, showers, everything. And in there, it doesn't matter what party you're a member of. We're all sweating, we're all working out, we're all getting cleaned up and getting ready for a day's work. And it's the most bipartisan area of the whole Capitol. A good friend of mine, Josh Gottheimer, he is from New Jersey. He's a Democrat, but we work together. We've sponsored 112 bills together in the 118th Congress.
Congressman, look, it sounds very idealistic, I'll give you that, but for a lot of your House Republican colleagues, they face more of a danger in losing their seat in a primary than in a general election. So what incentive is there for them to engage in bipartisanship when they could be worried about a challenge from the right?
Instead of worrying whether we're going to get reelected, we ought to be worrying about our district. We ought to be worrying about helping the people in our district, the American people. That's what we should be concentrating on.
And look, a House subcommittee chaired by your fellow Georgia Republican Barry Loudermilk said that the FBI should investigate former Congresswoman Liz Cheney for her conduct on the January 6th Select Committee. She denies those accusations, and you said the country needs to move on from January 6th. So how would prosecuting Liz Cheney fit with that?
Well, let's keep in mind what Barry Loudermilk's responsibility is. He's running this with the January 6th investigation. So he has a responsibility to look at these things. Barry's a very close friend and a colleague that I've worked with many, many years, and I will respect what he suggests.
Look, Congressman, back in 2022, you said that the January 6th rioters should be arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. President-elect Trump now wants to pardon them. What do you make of that?
Well, look, we've got to get past January the 6th. And what President Trump does, I don't have control over that. I will tell you that I still, to this day, think that what happened that day was wrong. But at the same time, we've got to get past January 6th. And look, I agree with President Trump. I think there were problems. I voted against certifying some of those, and I did it for a reason because of the changes that were made. But at the same time, look, our country's got a lot of concerns right now, a lot of problems, and we can't dwell on the past. We've got to look into the future, and we've got to solve these problems that are before us.
But if President-elect Trump pardons them, you would disagree with that?
I'm not going to disagree with what the president does. He's got his reasons for doing it. I think he's looking forward to serving with President Trump, looking forward to the next 4 years under his leadership. I've supported him. I'll continue to support him.
Representative Buddy Carter, thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And joining me now is Washington Democratic Congresswoman Suzan DelBene. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. You know, this bill to keep the government running will most likely require Democratic votes to make it through the House. Will you vote yes? Will it pass?
Well, I'm going to be voting yes. I think it's important that we make sure that the government's funded. But, you know, I also think this should have been done a long time ago. The fiscal year started on October 1st. We should be passing year-long funding bills, not waiting until the last second. And so it should have been done a long time ago, all the way through October 1st coming up. I'm disappointed this is another short-term funding package.
And Congresswoman, as you know, the world's richest man, Elon Musk, is whipping Republican votes against this package. So do you think that could cause it to fail?
Well, I think it's going to be important for members who are looking at to understand what's on the table. Government funding, important resources for farmers, resources to help communities that have been impacted by natural disasters. The alternative is shutting down the government. And so Republicans have to think about that. Again, we should have passed funding bills back before the fiscal year started. It's unfortunate we're in this position, but they're in the majority, and they need to make sure that they are putting legislation forward and supporting that legislation.
And this bill also contains a cost of living raise for lawmakers, the first one in more than a decade. Are you concerned with the optics here?
Well, I think members are going to vote what they think is best for their district. I know our members are really focused on the needs of their districts. That's what's really important. But again, this is about keeping the government funded and basically only funding us until the middle of March. So we'll be walking down this path again in the new Congress.
Yeah, and you bring up the middle of March. You know, unlike now, Republicans will control the Senate and the White House then, and their margin will likely be smaller in the House. So if they need Democratic votes then, will you be a yes? And will some Democrats need some stipulations to vote yes?
Well, I think it's going to depend on what we're voting on. I think that we are here to govern, and so it's really up to Republicans in leadership whether they're going to work across the aisle to come up with legislation that can be bipartisan. The way we really help our communities is by coming together to get legislation across the finish line. Republicans are going to be in the majority, and I guess the question will be, are they there to govern and work across the aisle to get things done, or are we going to see some of the chaos and dysfunction that we've seen this Congress?
And it's a very nice segue to my next question. Yeah, in just over a month, the president-elect will return to the Oval Office. So what are you expecting your function will be in Congress, in the minority, and what areas do you think there could be to work with a Trump administration?
Well, I think, you know, we always have opportunities to look at policy that will help families across the country, make sure that we're lowering costs, addressing things like affordable housing. These are all issues where we should be able to find a bipartisan path. Again, Republicans are in the majority. They're going to decide what bills committees take up and what comes to the floor. So there's a bipartisan opportunity if they're willing to work together. And we're going to also stand strong against any attempts to undermine people's rights, their freedoms, or undermine important policy that helps support families across the country.
You know, Congresswoman, the devil often is in the details. And so as we turn to specifics here, the president-elect told my colleague, Kristen Welker, that he's open to legislation on dreamers. Do you take him at his word there?
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see. I think this is an area where we've had discussions before. There's an opportunity, if you reach across the aisle, to talk about what that might look like. If people really come in good faith and work across the aisle, then we might have opportunities.
And I want to turn to the Democratic Party now as a whole. You're once again leading the organization charged with electing Democrats to the House. In November, you picked up 2 seats while Vice President Harris lost to Donald Trump. So how do you explain the disconnect there?
Well, remember, House races are all across the country. We are in purple districts across the country, these battleground districts, and I think we did a lot of things right. We had great candidates who were authentic, independent-minded candidates who are really standing up and talking to all members of the community about what they would do to help move our country forward. We had the resources to help them communicate, and that's what voters wanted to hear. They wanted folks who are going to come to Washington, D.C. to govern, who are going to put their communities first. I think that's a big reason why we were so successful in races all across the country and ended up picking up seats.
Yes, but, well, I want to put up what Senator Sherrod Brown, who recently lost his race, told my colleague Henry Gomez. He said, I lost in large part because the national reputation of the Democratic Party is that we're sort of a lighter version of a corporation, a corporate party. We're seen as a bi-coastal elite party, and it's hard to argue that. Do you agree with that critique?
I think why we won is because we had candidates who were speaking to the needs of their districts. Our districts are very different across the country, and we had candidates who were speaking to the unique needs they were hearing about from their districts. And these are purple districts. These are folks who really care about voting for someone who's going to stand up and represent them, and that's why we had strong candidates. They weren't Republican candidates who are waiting for Donald Trump to tell them what to do. These are folks who knew what to do, who wanted to reach across the aisle, who want to come to Washington, D.C. to get things done. And they built up trust in their communities, and that's why they won.
Well, Congresswoman, looking ahead to the next term, some Democratic ranking member slots are going to younger members who did not have the most seniority. So are we seeing the beginnings of a generational change in your caucus?
Well, I think we saw folks putting their names forward as potential leaders on committees. We had healthy debate. People made a case for why they thought they would be the best folks to lead committees, and we voted. So it was a very democratic process. I think the more we can actually bring things together, have those debates, let people put their ideas forward, that actually brings out the strength in our caucus. And I think it was really a healthy process, and look forward to working with all of our leaders as we head into the next Congress.
Representative Suzan DelBene, thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And up next, Russia arrests a man they say is responsible for the assassination of a senior military leader who was targeted by Ukraine. The latest from Moscow when we return. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Authorities in Russia say they've arrested a man in connection to Ukraine's assassination of their senior general in charge of the Kremlin's chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons unit. According to Russia's FSB, the man, described as an Uzbek national, was recruited by Ukraine's security service and was promised $100,000 US to carry out the attack. The Pentagon says it was not aware of the Ukrainian operation in advance. And today, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan appeared to break with Ukraine over its strategy of carrying out these kinds of missions.
The United States does not support or enable operations like this. We do support and enable Ukraine to defend itself and to take the fight to Russian forces on the battlefield, but not operations like this. From the United States' perspective, assassination operations far from the battlefield in a capital city, that's not something that's part of American military doctrine.
NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons reports from the scene of where that assassination took place.
Hey there, it's pretty extraordinary to be standing here. This is where Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov was assassinated just over 24 hours ago. You can see the power of the explosion, the bent metal, the bricks blown away from the wall, some people leaving flowers. And just today, Russian authorities saying that they now have a suspect in custody. Russian media saying that that is a man called Ahmed Kabanov, 29 years old, from Uzbekistan. He was detained outside Moscow, according to reports here in Russia. And Russian media now showing a videotape of him apparently confessing, saying that that has come from Russian authorities. Of course, he is under arrest, under duress. We only have the testimony of the Russian officials, of the Russian media, that he has in fact confessed to what happened here. But standing here, you can see just what a precision operation this was, because the general would have walked out of the apartment here and there was a car waiting just in the street, so a very short distance away for this explosion to take place. It was filmed from the back of a car we think was very likely parked around about where that red vehicle is there, across the street. And according to Russian investigators, the explosives were attached to a scooter leant against the wall here and remotely detonated. The video of the explosion, according to Russian investigators, was sent back to Ukraine, was being watched in Ukraine as this happened. The Russians are saying that they are determined to catch everybody responsible. What isn't being said so loudly here is how was it possible for an assassination to take place like this right here in the heart of Moscow on a general who is widely thought to be the most senior military official killed, assassinated on Russian soil since the war in Ukraine began.
We thank Keir Simmons in Moscow for that reporting. And joining me now is Mike Memoli at the White House. Mike, what should we make of the fact that the Biden administration is distancing itself from that operation?
Well, Gabe, obviously we have seen the fact that throughout this more than 1,000-day war in Ukraine, that Ukraine has at times wanted more support, more equipment, more offensive capabilities than the Biden administration has been willing to give them. And part of that is because they don't want to see further escalation that will provoke Russia, and that's exactly what they see in this situation, is a provocation rather than de-escalation. The Biden administration has been bracing for the fact that there will be changes in policy when President-elect Donald Trump takes office. So what they want to do is put Ukraine in the strongest position possible as they head for negotiations to possibly end this conflict. That's what administration officials say that their concern is right now, is that Russia will be put in a position which such a provocative attack here that they will have to do something more major in response.
And Mike, on the subject of helping Ukraine, what is the Biden administration's strategy to shore up aid for Ukraine before President-elect Trump takes office?
Really, Gabe, what they're limited to is just spending the money that they have. There are two different pots of money, $5.6 billion in the PDB authority, where they can send more equipment, more capability to Ukraine that has already been approved by Congress. And I think an indication of the tied hands that the administration has in trying to hand Ukraine the best footing it has in these negotiations is the fact that that CR that you were just talking about earlier in the show, no new money for Ukraine. Speaker Johnson promised that that would be the case, and that's exactly what was delivered in terms of this new CR. And so the Biden administration is limited to working with its partners to see whether they can make up some of the difference in the more than $20 billion that the U.S. Had been seeking, that the Biden administration had requested from Congress to be included in that CR. But we're also seeing a changing front in that G7 leadership, with the Italian prime minister soon to be potentially one of the only remaining members from the group that President Biden has been part of most of these last 4 years.
Mike Memoli at the White House. Mike, thank you. And still to come, the chances of the House passing that continuing resolution to fund the government seems to be getting slimmer by the moment. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. Things are changing quickly here. We continue to follow the drama on Capitol Hill, which is developing as we speak. The vibes are shifting as Republican Speaker Mike Johnson faces a brewing rebellion, fueled in part by Elon Musk, and now apparently President-elect Trump, against that must-pass government funding bill. Moments ago, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance put out a statement from Donald Trump and himself coming out against the continuing resolution to fund the government and avoid a shutdown Friday night. Given Trump's influence with House Republicans, this bill now seems dead on arrival, and the government appears closer now to heading for a shutdown. Also moments ago, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries issued something of a warning to the Speaker not to count on House Democrats if the Speaker pulls this legislation, saying, quote, You break the bipartisan agreement, you own the consequences that follow. Much more on this breaking news straight ahead. Welcome back. Joining me now as we're following the breaking news of this CR potentially falling apart and the odds of a government shutdown getting higher is the panel here. NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor, former special assistant to President Biden Megan Hayes, and former communications director for the RNC and Republican strategist Doug Heye. Thank you all so much for joining me. Sahil, I want to start with you. Things are changing minute by minute here. What's the latest from the Hill?
Yeah, this is a political earthquake on Capitol Hill, Gabe. There are 30 hours to go, roughly, before a government shutdown, and President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Vance are swooping in to try to blow up a government funding deal that was struck by the leaders of both parties. It was released just last night. It's a big, sprawling bill, 1,500 pages and all. It would keep the government open until March 14th, and just basically kicked the deadline into early in the Trump presidency. That was the theory of the case. But Trump and Vance say this bill should not pass. They're taking aim at a host of provisions in the bill, including a pay raise for members of Congress, which would be the first since 2009. They are also demanding a debt ceiling increase in a short-term bill that they say should replace this. That is extraordinary. That has been nowhere in the mix. That's extremely difficult to pass, and it's very unlikely they can do this in the next 2 days.
Yeah, you called this an earthquake. Look, earlier in the day, we were hearing from the Hill that, this was, not going to happen. The odds of a shutdown were very low. Doug, is this the Elon Musk effect?
I don't know yet, but it's certainly part of the Donald Trump effect. And, when Sahil was covering Capitol Hill when I was working in House leadership, we dealt with government shutdowns. We dealt with debt limit fights. The majority leader lost his primary. Those were calm, quiet days compared to what's going on just today. And what really looks to be the rest of this lame duck session and going into the President Trump's new term. And as he goes in, he may be creating a turbulence for himself as well. We start with a speaker vote. Is that now going to be in question? And if you're coming in as a new president, even if you've been there before, is that how you want to start 14 days before you're sworn in? Right. And risky strategy.
Megan, Hakeem Jeffries out with that tough-sounding statement. Where are Democrats in all this?
Look, I think that the Republicans are realizing that they need Democrats to pass some of these things, and this is going to be what's a foreshadowing for next year. I do think this is an Elon Musk effect on Trump because he put out a statement first, got a bunch of news. Trump probably got angry that he was getting more news, and so then they put out a statement. So I do think this is how it's going to go in next time. But I think that the Democrats are playing it smart. They know that they are needed, and they know that they need certain things. And asking for a debt ceiling raise, I mean, some of these demands are just not reasonable, and I don't think that they're going to work without the Democrats.
And Sahil, does this really happen hour by hour? Walk us through kind of what the vibes were on the Hill. We were here earlier in this broadcast. The vibes were very different than they are now. How did this change hour by hour, and how did we get to Donald Trump weighing in on this?
I think it started with the fact that this bill was supposed to come out over the weekend, give members several days to look at it, the 72-hour rule that House Republicans like to talk about, and that Speaker Johnson said he was committed to doing. That didn't happen. It got pushed. It got pushed again. It came out late yesterday. And then suddenly Republicans were looking at a 1,500-page bill that they were either forced to pass or shut down the government. And in some cases, I think they would have passed it, but it turns out with social media, with conservative media kind of lighting up against this, a lot of House Republicans came out against it. Elon Musk had been tweeting up a storm all day against it, elevating and boosting Republicans who were opposed to it. And now we have this joint statement from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. It seems to be the clincher. We have not seen a statement or an announcement from Speaker Mike Johnson yet, but I'd be very surprised if this bill can pass.
What is going through Mike Johnson's head right now, Doug?
I'm not going to repeat the language that's going specifically through his head, but this is what you sort of what you sign up for, except you don't expect this. This is certainly unprecedented, but everything with Donald Trump comes without precedent, and I think that's one of the things. Moving into a new Congress and a new administration should give Republican leadership some real pause here. If I'm John Thune, I'm not happy right now either, and he's in a new job. So as we have the speaker vote, which we've had at least one Republican member so far say that they won't support Johnson, at least in the first balloting. Right. This kind of chaos is not good for a new president.
Speaking of chaos, look, we were at the beginning of the show, we were talking about, oh my goodness, there might be a problem come March, with another funding fight there, 100 days into the Trump presidency. Now, before we are even into the Trump presidency, there is all this chaos on the Hill. Megan, how do we navigate this with, the Republicans having such a slim majority? Will would Democrats ever help Republicans in this situation, or is this a case where they're just going to have to let this play out and let the Republicans fight amongst themselves?
I think they'll let them fight amongst themselves on certain things, but I do think come a new Congress, they will help them on certain things like the economy. I think things that are going to help taxes and help middle-class people, I think the Democrats will help the Republicans on. I think that's a smart strategy for the midterms and then heading into 28. But I don't think they're going to help them now. I think they're just going to let them fight it out. Why? Why help them? Like, what good comes of this? It just is going to land back on you.
By the way, there's a phrase on Capitol Hill of getting to 218. If you're in the majority in the House, you need 218 votes. When Donald Trump is president, these members who've, raised alarms over the past couple of days, are they going to be willing to defy him? So there is a reason why Trump wants to get this off the decks and a debt limit increase now as opposed to in March when he's president. But ultimately, when he is president, he's going to have to deal with some of these things. And if you're Thomas Massie and you talk tough about MAGA, are you going to stand up to? Are you going to out MAGA, the creator of MAGA?
And look,
good luck.
With so many big issues coming up in the next couple of months, we're just talking about immigration. My colleagues Julia Ainsley and Julie Sirkin reporting that ICE facing a $230 million budget shortfall, and the administration is going to need Congress on board in order to move forward with this mass deportation plans. I want to play some sound that we're just getting from some of these House Republicans on their reaction to what's going on the Hill right now. Let's listen.
Passing 1,550-page bills, and we passed $330 billion of deficit spending since we were given the majority back on November 5th. That's not the way to, earn the American people's trust.
The fact is that, look, this is a sandwich. I don't know how else to say that. We're being forced into this position. They could have done a standalone. They did this because they knew that it would put members in this position to support it. We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't.
There's 435 people, but in the House here, right? There's a handful of people that make all the decisions. And everybody else is furniture. You're furniture. You get these bills, 1,500 pages, and you just get in line and support what the handful of people have said. That's the way things have worked up here. It's shameful in many ways.
Sahil, that sounds like flat-out mutiny that Mike Johnson has right now.
It's also a rude awakening for Trump about the legislative reality that he faces next year. They're going to do some sort of temporary bill whenever they can get this through that Democrats and Republicans are going to have to renegotiate. So they're going to have to go back to the table, cut a deal with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer to get anything through. They also, again, have to do the debt limit. It comes due next year. They need to do the confirmations through the Senate in the first several weeks of the Trump presidency. They want to do a big reconciliation bill on a party line basis with this tiny majority. All of this stuff at once. And we're seeing, I think, again, a preview of the legislative chaos we typically see when Donald Trump is at the helm. He does not pay close attention to legislating, sometimes until it's too late.
Oh, is that all? Is that all? I want to ask you something else. Switching gears now as we continue to follow that breaking news. A GOP-led subcommittee is now saying that Liz Cheney should be investigated for her role on January 6th. We were talking about that earlier in the broadcast. And in a statement, she said that Chairman Loudermilk's interim report intentionally disregards the truth and the Select Committee's tremendous weight of evidence and instead fabricates lies and defamatory allegations in an attempt to cover up what Donald Trump did. Sahil, where do we go from here? And do you think that the Republicans, where do we go from here with this investigation of Liz Cheney? Does it benefit what the GOP is trying to do right now?
I think that remains to be seen. I think this looks like Congressman Loudermilk, in a way, taking his cues from Trump, who has, for months, been saying Liz Cheney should be investigated, maybe she should be prosecuted. I think this is a reminder where a lot of Trump's allies will kind of defend him and say, oh, don't take him too literally, take him seriously. This is a reminder that a lot of his allies in positions of power do take him literally and seriously. Now, where this goes, I think it all remains to be seen. We know Trump's desire to kind of centralize control of the Justice Department and make his own calls in terms of what happens there. He will also have powerful allies on Capitol Hill who have subpoena power to launch their own investigations and maybe advance Trump's retribution agenda.
Doug, Trump told Kristen Welker that he does believe some members of the January 6th committee should go to jail. But is this him basically laying the groundwork for other people to do his bidding, that he won't actually direct them to do it? But
absolutely. He doesn't have to tell you to do it. You just follow orders that weren't explicitly given to you. But I would have said, if we were talking just as recently as 15 minutes ago, Republicans, you've got a lot better things on your hand to do than this. 15 minutes later, with what we've just seen with the Trump-Vance statement, you have very immediate things that are better to do than this. Keep your eye on the ball.
So, Megan, how seriously now do you think President Biden will consider a preemptive pardon for Liz Cheney, and should she accept it?
You know, I don't know what the administration is going to do here. I think that they're obviously all the options are on the table. I don't think decisions have been made, but I don't actually think Republicans want going into midterms that are extremely challenging with such a slim majority to have the American people focused on January 6th and the fact that the President-elect Trump tried to cause an insurrection and overthrow the government. So I'm not sure that having this and bringing all these people back and all this evidence back up is going to be good for them. But again, he's tweeting at 3 o'clock in the morning instead of worrying about things like a CR and the debt ceiling.
And really quickly, because we're running out of time, Doug, President-elect Trump is saying that his inaugural message will be about unity. How's that looking?
I think we've just learned again in the past 15 minutes. Not very optimistic on that.
All right. I want to thank you all for joining me. Sahil, Megan, Doug, thank you all for joining us here on the panel on Meet the Press Now. And I'm Gabe Gutierrez. We are back tomorrow. NBC News Now coverage continues now with Yasmin Vasugian in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.